So in order to have a good grasp on indulgences, purgatory is something that needs to be fully understood. So if you haven't come to a full understanding of it or still have some questions, I would recommend pressing pause to this video. And I've actually done a separate video called The Essence of Purgatory that you can search for on YouTube and it should come up. And go ahead and give that a watch and then come back and watch this one on indulgences. I say that because what an indulgence is it's essentially an action that we can take in order to have that purification that's done in purgatory done while we're still here on earth. So in the Indulgentiarum Doctrina, forgive me if I pronounce that Latin incorrectly, it was written back in 1967 by Pope Paul VI. He had stated, an indulgence is a remission before God of the temporal punishment due to sins whose guilt has already been forgiven. So, what exactly does that mean? So, when we sin, there are two different types of consequences. There's a spiritual consequence and there's a physical consequence. The spiritual consequence is that separation from God, which the ultimate separation would be eternal punishment in hell. And then that's considered what can be taken care of in confession. So when we're in a state of grace, it's after that portion of our sin has been forgiven that we can go forward. And then the second part is temporal sin. So the temporal punishment it's the worldly, the physical aspect of our sin. So it's essentially the consequence that we would face with it. Typical analogy is you break your neighbor's window. He can forgive you for breaking the window, but then you still have to replace the window. An indulgence is ultimately having that window replaced by the church by doing an act of something out of charity. So if we go and serve at the soup kitchen, or there's a whole gamut, a whole list of things that we can do to actually gain these indulgences. Some would be like spending a half hour in adoration of Christ, or spending a half hour reading scripture or listening to scripture. There are different types of indulgences. There is a plenary indulgence and a partial indulgence. So a plenary indulgence is one that actually absolves all of our consequences. It completely removes the need for purgatory for anything up to that point. We can't do an indulgence for anything that hasn't happened yet, but if we come with a contrite heart, one that's like truly genuinely sorry, there's a little spectrum of things that have to be done. We have to be in the state of grace. We have to have this internal motive that we're, committed to not committing sins here in the future, having gone to confession, received communion, and that we're praying for the intentions of the Pope. So when these things are all taken into account and they're done, we can then either do a plenary indulgence or a partial indulgence. So plenary, as I was saying, it actually absolves everything, whereas a partial indulgence it only takes away part of it. So way back when, they used to put days, like you will have 100 days out of purgatory if you do this, or you will have 300 days. And anytime that was done in the first place, it was always meant as more of a relative kind of term. Like if you're doing a partial indulgence for telling a lie to your brother, it might be something closer to 10 days off of time in purgatory. Whereas if you're doing a partial indulgence for a murder that might have been committed, you might get more days out of purgatory. It's just more time, because that level of purification that's happening is so different for the different consequences that each sin may have. The one thing is indulgences have this really strong connotation with Martin Luther when the church split. So when we look at the whole, monetary value, it was back in 1567 that Saint Pope Pius the Fifth he made a general statement that was saying any indulgence that is made that has a monetary value to it is totally irrelevant. It doesn't count for anything. Don't do it. Now, even when those, people were saying, hey, pay $100 and your mom will no longer be in purgatory, or anything like that was going on, that was a very localized occurrence. It wasn't something that was ever taught by the church. It wasn't something that was condoned. When it was discovered, similar to any other type of scandals that have happened in the church, it is addressed. It was addressed. It was stated. It was taken seriously. But it would be similar to a diocese doing that. It wouldn't be, like everybody was under this directive to start taking, the layman's money. But it was more the corruption in a local diocese that ended up happening, that they were trying to petition for this money. So that's since, that's gone. That's not something that's even done. And it's something that, indulgences is something that was sort of, ever since that happened, they weren't really gone to anymore, which is really something that's sad. And St. Pope John Paul II, actually, when the third millennium started, he started to offer indulgences. He had very specific, here's a plenary indulgence, and it had to do with, praying the divine office and going to Mass on these particular days. And the popes offer different plenary indulgences that we can look into and take advantage of, that essentially just help us to face the consequences and remove that temporal punishment, that physical consequence of our sin, now instead of having to go to the fire of purgatory and be purified there. Now, it's obviously an ongoing thing, but one thing to understand is there are no spare keys to heaven. When Christ left, he left the key with Peter. Peter was the one that, permission was given to the church to forgive sins. And with that, indulgences were then inferred due to the fact that there are those two consequences to sin. We can't just be, if after we're married, if my husband goes and has an affair, we can work through it, and I can say, okay, yes, I forgive you, but there's still going to be that physical, something that happens, whether it's, he accidentally got somebody else pregnant, or, then we have to face the music of a child, or whether it's me having the forgiveness, but at the same time saying, well, there's something that needs to be worked on here, so I'm going to go live somewhere else for a while, or anything of that nature. So dependent on what the indulgence is that we're trying to seek, the action that we're trying to do for the sin that we're trying to face the music of, different things are available. But understanding that there is no spare key to heaven, it is the only key to heaven, and we can aim for purgatory and say, oh, okay, well, if indulgences are just what I have to go through to get time off purgatory, I'll deal with that later. I don't want to go to the homeless shelter and feed anyone a meal, or I don't want to go to adoration when I could be watching a TV show. We can aim for purgatory, but the sad part of that is that if we miss purgatory, we wind up in hell forever. So it's much better to aim for heaven, and if we miss, we wind up in purgatory, and then we can work our way there with a continual bettering of ourselves to, as Matthew Kelly always says, become the best version of ourselves. One of the things that Aquinas had stated was all the saints intended that whatever they did or suffered for God's sake should be profitable not only to themselves but to the whole church. So when we start thinking about ourselves and our individual relationship with God, we are one body in the church, and we all represent each other. And when we suffer, we can offer those intentions for those that are in purgatory right now that didn't go through the indulgences. And it's ultimately, indulgences are considered extra sacramental, so they're salutary. They have a beneficial effect. It's not so much that it's required, because sin can be accounted for later on. And it's also important to understand that forgiveness is not gained through indulgences. You have to go to confession and have that forgiveness granted and then receive Holy Communion before we can face, replacing the window. So, and it's in penance, that guilt is removed, that spiritual consequence of sin is taken care of. And then, the effects of grace, the effects of contrition, that our heart is truly in it, they've already taken effect, and then we can go forward and, just work with God and be that Christian spirit. It's ultimately, our disposition matters in it. God is still going to be the judge. We can't do it in a robotic manner where we're just okay, yep, I'm going to go pray in adoration and Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. And like not really focus on the fullness of the words that we're saying and actually letting it transform our lives and go through that actual purification that purgatory does supply for us. And it's more about just like being a good person. Like the whole Christ calls us to pick up our cross and follow after him. Like he didn't just forgive the leper, like he healed him too. There was a spiritual interaction and a physical interaction. Like it has two sides of it. So with Indulgences, there was that really unfortunate misunderstanding of it when the money and everything else. Looking up Pope Paul VI, Indulgentiarum Doctrina, that's really helpful. I mean, it's very, it's an apostolic letter, so it's going to have a little more advanced language in it, but if you really want to take the time and have more questions about it, that would be the number one place that I would say to go. And yeah, I hope that this is helpful, though, just to kind of break it down. There's so much that goes into Indulgences, but I hope that understanding that, the guilt's already gone and it's just getting rid of that temporal punishment, that physical purification that we have to go through in order to truly gain what it is that God has for us and get to that place a little bit sooner while we're still here on earth. So I hope that you are all doing well, and I hope you have a happy Sunday, and I will see you again soon. Have a great day.